You are listening to the We Need to Talk About Oscar podcast, and this is our interview with Lachlan Milne and JC Molina, the cinematographer and the production designer of Lady in the Lake.
I mean, I remember in the beginning when Adma talked to me about the job, I was kind of like, ooh.
So we had a target when we walked into there in the first place, knowing that it would be shot in a very unpredictable way that would constantly be in flux.
I'd like to start by asking you guys the question we usually start our episodes with, which is asking our guests about how they fell in love with films in the first place. So, what are your stories?
Take it, Jason.
Zach, you go first. Nah.
Okay. I grew up around film. My old man was a director when I was growing up in Adelaide, South Australia, and my mum used to be a flatbed Steenbeck editor when we used to edit it on film. So they used to work together. So I kind of grew up around it, sort of absorbed it by osmosis, if that makes sense. And it was like my parents' work before I realized it was a film set. But the thing that really got me was the people. That always keeps me coming back to the film industry. It's just like this ragtag bunch of random people that you only ever see in like the mixing pot environment of movie making, which I love.
Oh, I love that. I was kind of the opposite. My family, Mexican-American family. So it was like become a doctor or a lawyer. And I none of those. I really loved theater, and I met a really great mentor in high school who had essentially told me to move to LA to pursue lighting and set design for Broadway, which is what I really wanted to do. And then in LA, I kind of found myself hanging around people who worked in film and kind of just went from there and PA'd on my first project, fell in love with this, exactly what you said, this ragtag team of weirdos. And I loved it. And so that's where I kind of stayed.
Well, thank you for sharing. And to me, a great place to begin with the project at hand, Lady in the Lake, by just jumping right into it. There is the parallel storytelling aspect of it all, as it's almost like there are two shows, but not as in one for Maddie and one for Cleo, but rather one before the intersection of their lives and one after, but we still get to witness their stories as their own. It's a kind of big question, but how did this form of storytelling shape your work?
Yeah, so essentially the whole process kind of began with a bunch of research. We did a ton of research, kind of had this obsessive research deck of 1,200 pages. And what we're really trying to figure out is what worlds are we trying to show, right? Like Maddie, before she leaves her family and goes into this more kind of bohemian lifestyle or trying to find herself. And what does that mean for also in the Jewish community and for the Black community? So it was interesting because in this research, we were really finding a lot of references of, this perfect all-American Jewish housewife from Pikesville. And then you contrast that with her apartment that she moves into in the Black community, which at the time was all kind of because of this movement called redlining, which was essentially from them blocking off neighborhoods where Black people were not allowed to move into, or not written in stone, but it was happening in the communities. So all of this kind of led up to these contrasts, right? Between her living in this all-American kind of perfect housewife setting, her moving out to go into this community that's not hers, and then her pretty much diving into that community through her journalism. So in the art department side and in the research side, it was very much about keeping true to those communities and keeping true to that story in the best way possible. And that's why with Penn Ave, you feel this beautiful, rich culture that's there from the jazz scene. So it was definitely very thought about and very the color worlds that we brought into each one, we're kind of obsessed over.
And all the while, there is a much more obvious or tangible intersection that is the meeting of cinematography and production design. What were your initial talks like in terms of the general look and basically the connection between your two departments?
I came into the project relatively late compared to JC. So by the time I came on board, JC and Alma and the rest of the team had done a really significant amount of prep, which was wonderful and super helpful for me. JC and I spent we spent quite a bit of time in prep together, didn't we? Going through stuff, looking at photos and looking at colors and set designs and all that sort of stuff, which I really love. It's one of the really fun things about collaborating with designers. When you get in on the ground floor and you're talking creatively and logistically as well, because obviously you have to make the film and the sets that we build as well. So they kind of go hand in hand a little bit. But I was really presented with this wonderful amount of work from JC and his team and Alma that really gave me a really good head start, because I kind of had to hit the ground running when we started.
Yeah. No, it's so true. It's so true. Yeah. And I remember like we'd have these like almost like debrief meetings in your office.
Yeah.
It would just be some art directors. Yeah. And it was a lot. The project itself was a lot. It was very fast paced, chaotic in many moments. But it was cool because I think a part of the art department deck, we had a lot of illustrations, and the illustrations I think were really nice for me and Lockie to be able to like talk and be like, okay, so this is what we had kind of decided. Like, are you okay? Like, do you agree with this? What do you, how do we? So luckily these illustrations were able to like guide these conversations in a way that was really helpful.
It's always great for me as well, because like once I get that from JC and his guys, then it's a shorthand that I can show to my G&E and my camera department and stuff like that. It's much easier to present somebody with like a bunch of different images and say, here's an impression of what the space is, because that can often inform a lot of lighting choices as well too, rather than a description, or necessarily you go to an empty room and say, well, at the moment it's an underarm store, but it will be a period 1960s, shopping center at some point, but just use your imagination. So it's much easier and better and collaborative for us to have visual reference of that. And what JC and his guys put through was great. And also the nature of how we had to shoot it. It's never the way that you want to shoot it. Like you never go, here's episode 1, here's episode 2, blah, blah, blah. You always, whether it be cast availability or location availability or how quickly we can get sets ready, all that sort of stuff. You end up shooting stuff so out of sequence. So you might shoot 3 or 4 different episodes in the one day, which involves JC and his set deck department turning around sets and, aging it or de-aging it, and obviously wardrobe, all that sort of stuff. So it's really important for us as a team to have a bit of a Bible about what that's going to be and have a quick reference to that, which I feel like, given to your point, how quickly everything came together and then, cast change and things, filmmaking, right? Stuff always changes. But being able to have a quick reference of that, for me, I know I used it quite a bit. It was super handy. So we had a target when we walked into there in the first place, knowing that it would be shot in a very unpredictable way that would constantly be in flux, which is sort of
It's totally true. It's totally true. But I mean, I remember like that was my first time ever like having like a fixtures department, which was super helpful. And I think you had come in like saying like, we need to have a fixtures department. And like, we got that, and it was so nice to like be able to pretty much make sure that you guys had like touched all of the lights on set and all of it, because a lot of the stuff that we did was a lot, like a lot of practicals, right?
Yeah.
So it was super nice to have Lockie's team like involved in that since the beginning, instead of just like walking on set and it being like, okay, well, here we are.
It's funny. It's like sometimes it's one of those gray areas. And I've done other shows before where you don't have that. And it's really, really helpful, because sometimes it's like, is it the art department? Is it the lighting department? It can kind of get lost in translation a little bit sometimes, because JC and I are both big on in-camera lighting as much as possible, particularly for a period piece. So being able to have like a go-to department for this job, I think was really imperative, and it helped both of us out a lot, because we could give that department the responsibility and the job, and knowing that when we would walk in, because by the time we get to set, it's time to shoot. So everything should be ready. So we're trying to do all that stuff in the background as much as possible and give the space to the director and the cast to do their thing. So that was a real feather in the cap. That was great.
That was super amazing. Handy. Another amazing moment was when I walked into Hex, and I remember we were like trying so hard to get all of the LED bulbs. Like I know, budgetarily trying to figure that out, and I was just like, wow. And I remember walking into Hex and seeing these incredible chandeliers from like original to the building, and it's just like all of a sudden they're all just going on like rainbow mode. Yeah. And it was just like, wow, Lockie's a total badass. Like he totally got that one.
I don't know if they're out at the moment, but there's obviously some sort of fever dream, almost music video, like hyper surreal components to the show as well. So it was also like a conversation between JC and I and Set Deck about trying to sort of future-proof what that will be, rather than, okay, we'll shoot the real version now and then give us a day to turn it around and we'll blah, blah. You kind of have to do that stuff from the beginning so that it gives everybody the flexibility to be able to pivot on the day, and all you're doing is just pointing numbers into a lighting desk and then you're changing it to, surreal mode, as opposed to what 1966 Hex looks like. So.
Surreal mode. I love that. I love that.
It was really fun. I haven't seen 6 yet. I'm pretty psyched to see it.
And I have in my notes
Yeah.
written fever dream sequence.
That sounds about right.
Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. Because it was a surprise to me, but a welcome one. And I mean, holy shit. The choreography, the camera movement, the production design, the transitions, and
Yeah.
just the ideas and execution of it all. Madness.
Yeah.
Because it's like, because we kind of leaned into, like, because we were so, like, strictly, you tell me if I'm wrong, JC, we're like so strictly period aware for so much of it. And then all of a sudden we have like this one particular episode where like almost like all bets are off and we can utilize, you know, lighting equipment and technology that didn't necessarily exist period specific to kind of heighten the thing, and it all of a sudden turns into Hair the musical, which was really interesting and different. It is cool.
I love it. I feel like I've watched it 20,000 times since we worked on this.
Oh, sweet.
I haven't told you, Lucky, but I was like in post nonstop. Like,
oh,
I've
really?
never worked so much in. Yeah. It was intense. I'm just glad it's all out now.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
But yeah, no, 6 is amazing. It actually really shapes up in a cool way. It's like very, very dreamy. Very interesting. I'm very proud of it. I love it. I hope that people understand it. It's fun.
There is actually another interesting aspect I'd like to get your ideas about and pick your brain on is the fact that the showrunner, writer, director Alma has a background in documentaries. You, JC, worked on Alma's feature debut, 2019's Honey Boy. And for my eyes and all my senses, one of the strongest points of the show is how real it feels. Both of you have alluded to how much research went into pre-production, but how did all of this around staying true to those times and even the smallest of details play out during filming?
I remember like in the beginning when Alma talked to me about the job, I was kind of like, ooh, this is a massive job for somebody who just had done Honey Boy. And B, it's like, I'm not Jewish, nor am I from the Black community. I don't know either of those communities. And so I remember just really insisting on them, like being like, first of all, I know you guys don't fully trust me yet because I'm like a nobody production designer who just did Honey Boy, but I also need like 3 months of prep extra of like research. And I insisted on it because it was like, Alma's Israeli, but she's not Jewish American. So it's like we have a lot of people that are somewhat from these communities, but not really fully. So it was like, no, we have to really make sure that we're representing these communities correctly. And so that's what cued this kind of 3-month research period where I had archivists, cultural advisors, librarians, like just an insane historians, like an insane amount of people that were just helping add to this insane document that like I remember like every week it'd be like 100 pages more, 100 like, and it was just like, wow, where is this going to end? And it had like an interactive map where you could like click on it and it would like take you to the set and like all of the research. And it would be like, well, no, this one's not from Baltimore. This one's from Chicago.
It's a lot of work.
It was an insane amount of work. But I just remember telling Alma, like, I was like, I don't want anybody on the job to have to Google. But if they're Googling, then they're not going to like go with our approved world of what we're thinking this should be. And obviously people Googled. But it was nice to be able to base ourselves so strictly on reality in the beginning. And another thing is, I love our industry, but I don't ever really reference film or TV. I think I'm kind of lame in that way that I don't speak that language as well as other people do. So it was very much about like, let's just base ourselves in some of the incredible photographers from the time. And that's essentially what we did. And throughout the filming process, because we had been so obsessed with it in the beginning, set deck, props, everybody, every single department, lighting, it was so ingrained in us that we didn't really steer it so far, except for in those dream moments where you might catch a little edge of a projector. But it was because we were in these dream moments and we were allowed to free ourselves from that cage a bit. But we definitely were always very true to like what, and I remember like we'd have a text thread of on-sets where the on-sets would be sending like, hey, they just moved this. Is this okay? And it's like, oh shit, let's double check. And so it was a little obsessive.
And how was this for you, Lucky?
I love period stuff. I really enjoy doing period work, because it's like full immersive filmmaking. Like you're trying to transport people. You're trying to convince them that this is 1966 as opposed to walking out the front door and seeing things as they are. And I love that kind of cloak and dagger element of filmmaking, you know. And we were fortunate. We had a wonderful set deck department and great art department. And we were lucky in the sense that a lot of the times we got resources. I mean, that's what you need for a show. To convince people that you're in that world, you really have to build it. You have to make it interactable. You know, people can pick things up. if there's money in cash registers, the money's okay. You know, like all that sort of like the detail stuff that I think is really important. And when you're outside doing wide shots with period stuff, then you have to lean on VFX a little bit. And there's some wonderful work of that in the show as well. But I really enjoy it. And then, you know, then it also comes back to the kinds of lighting you use. You know, like we've mentioned before, like we're big advocates for practical lighting and to know where the light's coming from and it's motivated and it feels grounded, you know. And I keep my lighting very simple, but I like to hide where it's coming from and make it feel like it's just the world rather than a film light that's clearly off camera that you set, et cetera. You know, it also frees up the nature of how you're going to shoot. If you're going to work like that too, which Alma was keen on doing, you know, like give the set to the actors as much as possible and let them dictate where the camera goes to a certain degree. And you can only really do that if you simplify things and if you lean on in-camera work, lighting-wise, etc., which obviously for us had to be as period as possible or just to hide it in a way that no one knows, which I really enjoy. I like that. I like the trickery of that.
It was amazing. I remember in Hex, the giant balloon lights. If you didn't look up, you just felt like you were totally transported into space.
Yeah.
It was such a genius way because Alma is one of those directors that is very much about, like, it's pretty stressful to have a director that's documentary based because it's like, they're basically like 360s the world, like
everything's up for grabs all the time.
Yeah. And it's not a bad thing. It's just, it's a beautiful thing, but it's also a horrifying as Lockie and I's position because it's like, okay, but at one point we're going to probably accidentally see some, you know? It was cool to kind of like experience that in a much bigger way because in Honey Boy, we had done that in a much smaller way. We're talking about a hotel room, right? That has like, you know, a lighting control guy moving around as shy as pacing around the room.
With a couple of people talking.
Yeah. And now we're talking about a giant department store with 80 extras and, you know, and so it was really amazing to see Lachlan's work in this massive scale and to see how it worked, you know, with like the lighting board up and like they're changing things while we're shooting and it's a little chaotic, but I think it's actually, it was it was pretty amazing to see that. So it was big ups on that because, you know, it's like, just like you said, you had to have the cash in the cash register in case the actor for whatever reason wanted to go there, even though it wasn't scripted, but you also had to like make sure that your lights were not at all ever in frame because if you turn the camera that way,
yeah, it was a day-to-day thing. It was fun. It was definitely tricky at times. And, you know, JC and I had to kind of lean on each other on like to help each other out on occasions. You know, I need to put something in front of this because I can't move that for XYZ reasons or vice versa. Do you know what I mean? So there was a lot of that. But ultimately, I think as hard as it makes it for JC and I think it ultimately probably benefits the project, particularly the actors, I think, because they're not governed by, you know, say your line here, walk to this point, say your other line, turn, sit down there. You can't turn your head more than this way. You can't look, you know what I mean? All that. Like once you put limitations on actors, especially when you have younger kids as well too, then you're kind of watching them remember what they should be doing rather than letting them concentrate on doing the best version of the performance they can, which I think makes everybody's work better when you can do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. It's one of the beautiful things that I think Alma does really well. It's letting her actors really, you know, explore and find it, which is cool. So yeah,
just harder,
just a little harder on us.
And Lady in the Lake is a delicate but rather heavy story you can only approach head on if you want the audience to feel its weight. Sure, you're professionals, but still you have feelings. Were there any parts of the project or moments of the shoot when either of you was a little hesitant or even taken aback about the rawness, intensity of certain features of it?
What about you, JC? I've got one.
Lucky, you go first.
I hadn't really thought about that until you asked the question, but the one that jumps out for me was the scene where Maddie is having like a home abortion. That for me was pretty tough. You know, I've got kids now and it's like, there's no way you're getting me to watch Lorenzo's Oil now. And that was like a little bit of that for me. It's, you know, I had nothing quite like that, but there was, you know, a friend who had a similar-ish experience and it was quite tricky. And, you know, Natalie Portman's an amazing actor and, you know, we built a set and then we put some 1960s, you know, creepy hospital tools in there and some dim lighting and all of a sudden it's real, you know, and that for me was the one. It was an important part for the story, but that was a tricky one to shoot, I think, on a personal level. What about you, JC?
trying to think. It's a very specific question, which I like.
A lot of the times, JC wasn't there in his defense. He was like
Yeah.
prepping the next set and stuff like that. So I was always there going through it and
Yeah,
living it. And
yeah.
a lot of the times, JC would pop in and out.
I think it just came to me, and I don't think it's something that we shot at all. The story is a result of this, but I think it would. I'm going to say it would be when we were tech scouting. Sorry, when we were director scouting. And the reason why I say that is because I think we expected a Baltimore that was more finished, that was more not so destructed. And I think what was hard for me, so I mean, you have the redlining that happened, right? And at the time, Penn Ave used to be kind of a predominantly Jewish, Italian owned street. That street became a black owned street, which was, the hub of jazz in Baltimore. And unfortunately, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, they burned down a lot of these incredible establishments. And so I think for me, it was really hard to like go through some of these locations in the director scouting, like in the preliminary scouting, even before Alma was there, and just really see how deep that hurt was, right? And that hurt came from like the terrible things that have happened to the Black community in this country. And I think that for me, more than it is, like Lockie said, I wasn't really on set as much because I was constantly on the next thing. But I think for me, the hurt that was really a hard thing to deal with was that community's hurt in Baltimore. So it's not quite from the set, but I definitely feel like you feel it on the set because the story does talk about these things. But yeah, and actually I'll say a little quick story. Like I remember we had just built Penn Ave on this street that was not Penn Ave, but it was close. And this woman and her daughter were driving down the street. It was the day before we were going to shoot it. Unfortunately, we could not shoot at the location because of an issue that happened. But anyways, I was turning in the set. I was about to head out. And this lady's driving with her daughter down the street. And she's like pretty much, windows are down. She's pretty much screaming like happiness. She's just like, oh my God, this is what it used to be. This is what it used to be.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, she strolled by me and she was like, and I was like, hey, is everything okay? Like, what's up? Trying to like kind of knew where she was going. And she was like, this is insane. I was a little girl that used to live right next to Penn Ave. And this is it. And she was telling her daughter, like, this is what it used to be. And I had her walk around the sets and we were talking. She gave me this huge hug. She's crying. I'm crying. And she's like, I've always wanted to describe and show my daughter what it used to be, not just through photos, but through experience. And you're allowing me to do that. And it was literally one of the most insane feelings in my career where I was just like, holy shit. Like the pain that I felt in the
I had no idea.
That's awesome. It was insane. It was insane. And actually, I invited her to the little premiere that we had in Baltimore.
Oh, good on you.
It was so nice. We had such a beautiful moment. And to this day, it's just one of those moments in my career where it's like, man, the pain that I felt in the beginning because of this horrible thing, it didn't go away, but it felt so good to feel that somebody from the community was like just overjoyed by something that my research, that my work, that my design did for them. It was just, I don't know. It's really beautiful.
I don't have any stories like that. That's way better.
Lucky was like, I mean, come on. You were like shooting nonstop, long ass hours.
That's
long day.
That's lovely. Yeah.
There are loads of beautiful looking, amazing TV shows, but this TV show is overall incredibly cinematic on a level which is rarely seen in television. What do you guys who worked on it think allowed and led to this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I sometimes think when you think about like cinematic, I guess there's like a real gray area between TV and movies now, I think as well, which is great because people love movies and people want TV shows to feel like movies. And I think a lot of times they do. And essentially this is like a 7-hour movie broken up into 7 episodes, kind of, right? I don't know. I often think about coverage when you think about like cinematic. I think about like editorial pacing. A lot of it, sometimes TV shows traditionally have been quite heavily edited. And I think there's more of a push, which I really like as well, more of a push now to maybe slow the pacing down a little bit, which I think always feels more filmic for me when you're not just doing shot, reverse shot, watching somebody talk, watching somebody else talk, maybe you're sitting on a wide shot or something like that. You're kind of simplifying things a little bit. I think there's definitely moments in our show that do that. Maybe that helps. But, we're all filmmakers and we all want to put our best forward. And it was like all about being as immersive as you can, convincing people that this is the world that we're presenting and it's all legitimized and stuff. So I don't know. That's my reaction.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. And I also think it's like, it's what you said. Like, we're all filmmakers, right? Like, I think we all thought of this as a 7 hour film.
Mm.
Unfortunately, that makes everything so much more difficult. But we all thought about it as that, and it was very much, I think, the quality of a 7 hour film. Like, I remember, watching references that people were talking about other shows, and I was just like, these don't look real. Like, these feel, and I'm not saying that about every show. I definitely don't watch enough TV, but a lot of things don't feel as real as they should, I think. And also maybe because it's just to feel good, maybe other shows are more feel good. And you don't want to like think about all these real problems in the world. But in my mind, I'm like, if there's not a heroin needle on the floor where it needs to be, it's wrong. Like, like I think it was Moonlight that I watched forever ago, and I was just like, wow. I think there was like a tampon on the floor, and I was like, that's the most beautiful fucking design ever. Like, it's incredible. And so I think that we always had that idea of like, it cannot feel like overglossed. I remember they would bring cars to set, and it'd be like, if these cars don't have soot on them, it's wrong. Like, if they're too shiny, it's wrong. There's something so beautiful about period TV shows that like show these really beautiful moments, and it's very like glitzy, but it just doesn't, it's not what we wanted to do. Like, there were shows that we clearly were like, this is not going to look like this, and it cannot. Like, if you bring us a car that looks too perfect, it's like, where are the antique cars that have the busted hoods and the doors, but I feel like a lot of times these pieces are like kept as relics, as they should be, and they're cared for overly perfectly. And sometimes that goes into the filming process. So I think we were just obsessed with making it as real as possible.
Yeah. And it shows. I mean, it really does.
Okay.
And as a final question, you both have some pretty interesting, much anticipated upcoming feature projects. As far as I know, Lucky, you shot Atlantis, a Pharrell Williams inspired musical directed by Michel Gondry, starring Brian Tyree Henry, Janelle Monáe, Divine Joe Randolph, Quinta Brunson, and UJC did Mimi Cade's sophomore feature, Holland, Michigan.
Nice.
Starring Nicole Kidman, Matthew McFadyen, Rachel Sennott. Sure, you can't really tell us anything about these, but still, what is it that you'd say we are going to get out of these two films thanks to your respective fields of work specifically?
Lucky, you go first. By the way, I'm so excited about Lucky's job because I've heard a bunch about it from the crew, and it sounds so cool.
I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be cool. It's like, I'm a huge fan of doing things that I've never done before, if you get presented with that opportunity. And I've never done a musical. I mean, Michel Gondry is, quite an auteur, and I grew up watching his exceptional music videos, and it was a real joy for me to work with him, and we got on really well. We had a good time. The music is fantastic. I just wanted to do something completely different from what I'd done before, because I don't know 100% how to shoot a musical. And I made up a lot of it when we went, and so did Michelle and I, and stuff like that with our wonderful choreographer. But that's what I love about filmmaking, and that's why it's always so interesting and so diverse. I think it's cool. It's an amazing cast and really fun. And there's some huge, big, all singing, all dancing with some Michel Gondry in-camera surrealism revolving set stuff, which is pretty cool, which you'll be into, JC.
Yes. Max Orgel, he's a genius.
Yeah, he did a great job. I think it's going to be cool. I can't say too much, obviously, but I also want to hear about JC's project because I don't know much about that, and that also sounds cool.
No, so it's funny because during Lady in the Lake, at the end of it, we were all kind of dead, rightfully so. But Mimi, who, who's a good friend of mine, called me up about this project, and it sounded super interesting. So I think there was a weekend where I went preliminary director scouting with her, and I just kind of fell in love with the idea. And I was just really telling her how I was trying to push it more into the 80s instead of the 90s, and she was totally eating that up. And we were talking about dream sequences and just like trippy moments. And I was just kind of like, okay, this sounds great. As you can tell, I like dream sequences. Just anything fantastical, I think, is cool. And so we really got on with that, and it happened. So it's exciting. The crew was amazing. It was with Gael, who I've worked with a lot, Gael Garcia Bernal. So that kind of lined up in a nice way that we got to hang out more. Nicole is fantastic and amazing and such an interesting person. So pretty cool to go from Natalie to Nicole. Is kind of like, okay.
It's awesome.
Yeah, so it was really great. I actually am expected to go see an edit soon.
I was going to ask, you haven't seen anything yet?
I went to the editing studio probably like 4 months ago.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm excited to see something a little more finished up.
Yeah, for sure.
They finally wrapped they locked picture, so.
Oh, good. That's exciting.
It'll come out in spring. Wait, when's yours coming out?
I don't know. It's a very good question.
Yours just barely finished, right?
We wrapped about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I think. So I think I'm coloring it Christmas time. And then I'm not sure. Maybe. We'll see. I don't know.
It's exciting. So cool.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, guys, and for just letting me and helping us set this up. Because, yeah, I really wanted to have the two of you on together.
That was great. We haven't seen each other for a while, too. So it's great. I really enjoyed it.
It was really fun. Yeah. And honestly, I love asking questions myself, but I love it even more when I can ask the questions and you guys can get into a conversation between each other. So, yeah,
it's great.
It was really fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, Áron.